Are you looking for a draft strategy video for fantasy hockey in 2025? Well, 24,000 of you loved the video we did last season, so we're going to run it back this year with some new strategies to help tackle your fantasy drafts and put yourself in the best possible position to win. This is always one of my favorite videos going into the season and definitely one you do not want to miss. It's going to be a good video, guys, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. Now, I know firsthand how stressful draft strategies and draft videos can be, and ultimately when you go into your draft, it's could be a little bit too much sometimes. And you saw that last year with the Fantasy Puck Patreon League drafts. You didn't see my POV, but during that draft, I was stressed. There were a lot of players being sniped, and that's just all part of drafting. Now, to begin this video, I want to break down round by round what you should be looking for. So typically in the first round for me, and you guys know my massive emphasis on defensemen, but typically in the first round, you want to be grabbing an elite forward. I know I'm right now in the early stages. We are seeing Vezina trophy winner last season, Connor Hellebuyck, going in the first round. For me, goalies are just way too volatile. So I think in round one, I have no desire to be drafting any goaltenders. Now, for me in round one, I always want to be looking for an elite forward. So any of the guys in the top 12, and I'm going to be breaking down my favorite picks from round one all the way down to round three in a little bit later of a video. But you want to be looking to grab an elite forward or Cale Makar. Now, for me, he's the only defenseman that should be going in the first round because he is basically like a forward playing defense and provides massive upside. So within your top 7 picks, if you can snag Makar in the mid round of the first round, Cale Makar would be the only defenseman I'm looking to draft. But in the first round, you definitely want to be looking to draft an elite forward, best available on the board based on rankings, and Cale Makar. Now, in round two, it depends on where you're picking. If you have a later pick, you're probably going to be going back to back, and it's very likely that you are going to have to take another elite forward just because that some of the other defensemen will end up falling in the mid to late second round, contingent on the competitiveness of your leagues. But typically, I want to be looking at my first defenseman in the second round if I'm not getting Cale Makar in the first round. So what you're going to want to be doing if you're drafting with the early picks of the first round, you probably want to be going an elite forward and then a number 1 defenseman. If you're picking the mid rounds and you happen to get Cale Makar, you're probably going to be going Makar as your first defenseman and then running it back with an elite forward, whoever's best available. And now if you're in the later part of the first round, you're likely going to want to be drafting an elite forward and then turn it back with another elite forward. Now that brings you to round 3. And in round 3, if it's contingent again on where you pick, but if you go forward, you definitely want to be grabbing your first defenseman at least in the third round. That's probably the latest I would go because defensemen are far and away the scarcest position in fantasy, and you will see that later in the strategy video. But you want to be either grabbing your defenseman 2 or another forward if you went forward defenseman or potentially defenseman. And I have been asked that question before. Now, if I take Makar in the first round, is it okay if I take Dahlin in the late second round? That's completely fine with me because you have your D1, your D2, and now you can focus on the forwards that have fallen because all your other league mates are scrambling to draft defensemen. So in round 3, it's either going to be your elite defenseman number 2 or a high conviction forward that you're really high on that you think can outperform their ADP. Now, in round 4 to 6, you may be thinking, I'm not going to be taking a goalie in my first 6 rounds, and that's typically not how I like to play fantasy. And I think the strategy for a long time has been because of the volatility with goaltenders to hold off as much as you can. But if you do remember the Fantasy Puck Patreon League draft last year, I wasn't live, but I was drafting in Division 2, and I ended up taking Connor Hellebuyck in the 5th round. And now that does happen, and I will use that as an example later on in this video, but that doesn't happen too often where you're able to get a goalie like Hellebuyck in the 5th round. So if goalies fall in round 4 to 6 that you think should be first, second round picks, that's Vasilevsky, Shesterkin, Ottinger, Hellebuyck, I'm fine with you taking them there. But you don't need to reach for a goaltender because of the volatility, because you can draft league-winning goaltenders later. We saw what happened with Darcy Kuemper last year. He was a 10th round pick and ended up being a league winner for most people that are in category leagues. In points league, maybe not as good, but still, I digress. We go back to round 4 to 6. You want to be looking here for some higher upside forwards, Matt Boldy, Cole Caulfield, guys that have a ton of upside that are younger in age. And I'm completely fine with you grabbing your defenseman 3. And you may think I'm crazy that in the first 6 rounds you already have 3 defensemen, but 3 defensemen, 3 forwards. You know that there's so many forwards to draft in fantasy, especially with centers that always tend to fall in drafts. So you don't really need to prioritize forwards too early, because if you handcuff yourself with 5 forwards and a goalie in your first 6 rounds, you're going to be starting off your defenseman one with someone like, I don't know, Jake Sanderson or any other defensemen that are within this range. So that's typically how I'm going to look at the first 6 rounds. Now we get to round 7 to 11. So this is where I typically want to be drafting my first goaltender. Now, again, it's all contingent on what happens in the draft, and goalies may fall, goalies may be getting taken early, but this is where I want to be drafting my goaltender one. And then in those 4 rounds, you want to be drafting likely your defenseman number 4. So it depends on how many defensemen you have in your league, but from what I see, it's usually 4 plus with a couple bench spots. And you typically, if you have 4 bench spots, you want to be drafting at least at a minimum 5 defensemen. I'm fine with 6 as well, but at a minimum 5 defensemen. So this is where I would look to grab my defenseman number 4, and then 2 high upside forwards. There are a lot of sleepers that always occur in these rounds that your league mates may not be aware of that you can scoop up. Dalen Gunther is a great example off the top of my head here that you can look to grab in these rounds. High upside forwards, your first goaltender, and then your defenseman 4. So now we're going into round 11, and let's say hypothetically, we've gone through 11 rounds. We have our goalie 1, we have 4 defensemen, and we have 6 forwards. So that's 11 total picks right there. I had to do the math in my head there. So your team is looking pretty well-rounded right now. Most of your positions are likely going to be full by now. If you went 2 centers, 2 right wingers, 2 left wingers, so that's going to be full. You have your 4 defensemen, that's going to be full. And then now you have your goaltender. So now you're drafting your goalie number 2, which is the only empty position for you. And then your high upside plays, the guys that are going to be sleepers, guys that should significantly outperform your ADP, guys that maybe you're a fan of and you want to have on your roster because you watch them play every Saturday night at home. So there is a lot of options there around 11 plus. This is where you target your sleepers. Or if you're going through your draft and you're low on the category coverage, I'm going to use an example of last year. Again, I'm just going to continually use the FPPL draft because that was far and away my most competitive draft last season. This is where you take your high upside plays or your category fillers. And last year it was round 16. I know this is a low hanging fruit example, but I was really lacking on hits. And I'm like, who should I grab here? And I looked. Washington Capitals, Tom Wilson, ended up being a league winner last year. I drafted him for the hits, but he ended up being just everything else and so much better. So just evaluate throughout your draft what you need in those later rounds. This is where you should be loading up your draft queue and picking those high upside sleepers that you are that you're very high on going into the season. You think can significantly outperform your ADP, or players that just are completely out of whack with their rankings and their ADP. Your league mates won't be on them. This is where you can draft your goalie 2 and your high upside plays for the last couple of rounds of your draft. That was almost too much talking, but I feel like it was very helpful. So now let's go into the first legitimate strategy, I would say, is research and prepare. And I emphasize this way too much and people don't do it enough. So the first thing you're going to want to do is know your scoring system. And I released the goalies video recently, and I had a comment saying you should be able to identify between categories and your points league. We are back for season 3 of the Fantasy Puck Patreon League. Last season, we had 12 leagues, 144 participants, and it came down to the wire. We are now reorganizing all of our leagues, promotion and relegation based on how everyone placed. We had a lot of interest. The forums are quickly filling up. So if you're interested, click the link in the description below. If you have any questions on how the FPPL works, check out our website or join our Discord and send me a quick message, and I'll be sure to answer any questions that you may have. And what players are good for both. And that's the first thing you need to know when you're going into your draft, especially if it's a brand new league, or if your scoring may have changed in the new season. But understand if your league is a points league, a categories league, or a roto league, because the players you draft are going to be different contingent on what league you're in. And now if you're in a points league, if you're drafting goaltenders, points leagues, for me, I think is where goaltenders you can definitely wait on, and you want to be drafting those high volume Lucas Daw style goalies and not prioritizing in a categories league goalies that may not start every single night but have very elite counting stats like Logan Thompson. So make sure you understand what type of league you're playing in. Is it a weekly league? Is it a head-to-head league? Is it points? Is it categories? Is it rotisserie? So there's a lot of different options that go into your draft, but you have to make sure that you're prepared to understand what type of points league you're in. Now, the other thing is to study players' rankings, study their ADPs, understand the sleepers and new developments and injuries. There's so much that happens when training camps come out, and there's also so many available tools online. There are a lot of amazing YouTube creators across the YouTube community that provide you with this data, with the player rankings, with their ADPs, their sleepers, and then the updates come throughout training camp. And you can just use Twitter, you can use Rotoballer, you can use Daily Faceoff. We provide updates. There's a lot of different tools that you can use to see these new developments, to see these injuries, to understand player rankings, their ADPs, their sleepers. All this stuff is available to you, and you could have your own sleepers, you could have your own rankings, and never ever go into it using the fantasy apps rankings, because they're always going to be incorrect relative to what all the experts are saying. Now, I wouldn't consider myself a full expert in fantasy hockey. We've been doing this for about 5 years now, but still, it seems to be there's a lot of misranked players across fantasy. And what I see sometimes is you panic in your draft and you're like, who's the best available player? Oh, it's Evgeny Malkin. He's ranked 71 right now. I'm going to take him right away. But then you look further down, you see a guy like Nazem Kadri, who's at rank 168. But because the rankings are different, you're panicking and you're going to draft Evgeny Malkin, who going into this season should be a little bit worse than Nazem Kadri as an example. Next is understanding the positional scarcity and category coverage players. And I always emphasize defensemen are scarce, goalies are volatile, forwards, there's a lot of them. And make sure you understand that going into your draft. And if you're in a keeper league, another thing you have to look at is how many defensemen are being kept, how many forwards are being kept, what goalies are available. So understand that pre-draft on what going into your draft, you have to know where the positions are going to be scarce, what your team needs, and understand the category coverage players. I always emphasize Mackenzie Weegar, Mort Seider as two defensemen who may not put up 80, 90 points like Quinn Hughes, Werenski, Yossi, Makar, but these are guys that will put up 200 shots, 200 blocks, 200 hits, and they cover all the categories. And I use the example of Tom Wilson as my low-hanging fruit in the last bit, and that's a guy that just covers blocks. He gets you hits, he gets you shots. So you need to know with those players and when they're available. Now, another thing that I tend to see a lot is knowing your league mates and their tendencies, and I always use this example. But we have Leafs fans, we have diehard Montreal Canadiens fans. You guys are all awesome people, but you tend to draft your players a little bit earlier than they should be going. And if you're someone that's serious and wants to try and win your leagues, put the bias away and just go for the best players that you find available. You don't need to go for your favorite team, but sometimes, and you'll see it in the very last slide, the very last tip I have is have fun. So if there are players you watch on a Saturday night at home, that's completely fine. Now, next, if it's a keeper league, review the keepers, know the trades, know the pick swaps. For me, this is a good example, again, is my fantasy football league. There's a guy that's just not very strong at drafting. He traded all of his players last season, had a ton of picks in the first couple of rounds. For me, I know he's going to mess up the first few rounds, meaning that I'm going to be able to steal some players here. So kind of know what's happening, know what the keepers situation is, where they're going in drafts. I know there's some leagues where your keepers go up 1 round per year. I have that in one of my other leagues. So just understand what's going on throughout your keeper league. Lastly, like I mentioned, there's tons of tools available. Use projections, use the draft tools. They're at a low cost or they're free. You can build your own. There's a lot of options available online for this. Use your projections and draft tools to give you the edge over your other league mates. If you're playing in a $50 buy-in league and first place is $600, it doesn't hurt to just spend a little bit extra time to look at projections, to look at draft tools, to give yourself the edge and to help you make more informed decisions. The next strategy we have here is prioritizing core positions. Now, typically what we see in drafts, this has been over the last couple of years especially, is there are a lot of centermen and a lot of centers that are going late in drafts that have a ton of value, and you don't need to prioritize them early. We always see the handcuffs. So if you have first overall or you have a top 3 pick, it's likely you're getting a guy that's just a sole center position. Austin Matthews is an example, Nathan McKinnon, Connor McDavid. So these guys lack flexibility, which means if you take a center in your first pick and then you go around in the 3rd round, take another centerman like Alexander Barkov, then you're handcuffed for the rest of the draft where you can't really be taking centers because these guys can't play any other position. So prioritize your core positions. Don't focus too much on drafting those elite centers early because there's always value in the mid to late rounds. Nazem Kadri, Joel Eriksson-Ek, Vincent Trocheck, Dylan Cousins. There's lots of examples of centermen that can be taken in the 10th round plus that give a ton of value and always outperform their ADP. Now, goaltenders is always the tricky topic, and you know me, I love to go the zero goaltender strategy, and they're very, very volatile positions. You saw just last season how good Vasilevsky was. The season before, he was not even close to how good he was last season. The same thing with Jeremy Swayman. Now, I know last year was a little bit different. If he had a contract, he would probably go in top 40 in drafts last season and ended up being a huge bust. So goalies are very, very volatile, which means I'm not going to emphasize taking a goaltender who is generally more risky than other positions early in drafts. And I want to be taking my goaltenders late. I always want to be taking goalies on really good teams or goalies that will give me a ton of volume. Now, defensemen are always scarce. So prioritize defensemen often, prioritize defensemen early, because if you don't, you are going to be handcuffed with defensemen. You're going to be scrambling all over the waivers. You're going to be scrambling to make trades. If you take 5 or 6 elite defensemen, you're going to be having your league mates trading you some of their early round forwards that have very, very good upside for those defensemen that you drafted because you were smart and took them early in drafts. So defensemen is one thing you always want to prioritize. I just went back to one of my last year strategy video, and one of the comments said, I changed my whole strategy. I drafted defensemen early and I finished top 3 in my league. So just keep that in mind that defensemen, especially in competitive leagues, go early, and you have to make sure that you're also taking them early. Now, focus on category coverage players. Don't just sell yourself to high scoring players. And I see this way too often where everyone just tackles goals, assists, power play points because these are the flashy players in the leagues, but sometimes they don't contribute to any other category. I would rather a 50-point player, let's use Sam Bennett, who will give me 230 shots, 180 hits, and 70 blocks, than take a guy that's going to get me 40 goals, 40 assists, 200 shots, 40 blocks, 40 hits. Because I want guys that can cover all categories. And don't just sell yourself on taking every single high scoring player because they're flashy on the ice, but they may not be as flashy in fantasy. Fantasy is different than on ice. You want to be taking guys that cover all categories. Now, the other thing I see, and I did mention this a little bit with the centers, is just don't overload yourself on one position. Centers is the best example I could possibly use in just taking way too many sole centers, which means their only position is going to be center for the entire year because you're going to be stuck trying to make make trades, figuring out who to drop. And then you're also going to be looking at your lineup and saying, I have 3 elite centers. They're all ranked top 20, but I can only start 2 of them. So then every week you're making a tough decision. You sit Mark Scheifele to start Alexander Barkov. Barkov gets an assist and a shot, and Scheifele gets 3 goals because you can't roster him because there's no position flexibility there. So don't focus on overloading on one position. Find the guys that have good eligibility, good flexibility. A great example, Brady Tkachuk. He's always center left wing. Leon Draisaitl, always center left wing. So there's a lot of guys that have a lot of position flexibility. Don't just prioritize guys that have one single position. I feel like I'm talking really fast right now, but hopefully you can understand me. So the next strategy is Q and React, and the most underutilized tool in all fantasy sports is the draft queue. So preparation doesn't just happen pre-draft, it also happens during the draft. And for me, I always get in an hour, 30 minutes early, and then load my queue up with players. You see it all the time when I'm doing mock drafts. My queue is full of players, and you have to make sure that you're doing that because if you get stuck, if your players get sniped, you have to be able to pivot to other guys you have in your draft queue and not panicking. So load up on your queue with players. Do not ever have an empty queue going into your drafts. Now, know your draft position and when each of your picks are and kind of react to how the draft is flowing. So if you're picking 7th overall, do a couple mock drafts at the 7th overall pick. See who's going often, see who's going before, see who you can take in the next couple of rounds and react based on draft flow. And what I mean by that is if you get into the 5th round and you see 7 goalies or 7 defensemen going in a row, you're going to have to pivot your strategy a little bit and maybe react because the 7 goalies I just went means that there's really not many goalie ones available and you may have to pivot quickly. So make sure that your queue is loaded and then you can react based on what your other league mates are doing. And that goes into my next point of planning for multiple scenarios. Players are going to get sniped in your draft no matter what. And we see this all the time. I stream my drafts and you see it all the time happen where guys in my queue get sniped. You may think your league mates are stream sniping you. You think they're looking at your draft queue over your shoulder if you're drafting in person. This tends to happen all the time. So just don't keep your eye on one single player. If you're picking in 12 picks and you're like, no matter what, I'm taking Andrei Svechnikov here, no matter what. And this always happens. It's almost like, for those who understand the reference, it's almost like COD timing. So in COD timing, it's like you're staring down your iron sights, and then the second you look away, the guy turns the corner. And that happens in drafts too. You have your sights on Andrei Svechnikov, and the pick before you, Svechnikov gets picked, and then you're scrambling. So make sure you always have a couple players ready and react according to where guys are getting drafted. Now, the last thing I want to say is just avoid reaching on players just because you like them. Don't need to reach on them. Just because they're ranked so high on Yahoo, you don't need to reach on them. And I said this earlier, but just don't use the Yahoo, ESPN, Fantrax rankings. Now, there are going to be times you may be drafting from your phone. I had to draft in a fantasy baseball league at a golf simulator this year, and there's times where I just can't look at my cube because going from your phone is just way too hard sometimes. And I'm like, okay, who's the best available? I'm going to take this guy. I don't have time to react. And for me, it's like if you're drafting and you have the tools readily available, don't just base everything off the Yahoo, ESPN, Fantrax rankings to make a pick. Make sure you use some of the knowledge that you know, guys in your draft queue, guys that are sleepers, guys we've talked about, and the projections you have available to you to help base your pick. Moving on, we have mock drafts, and this is something that I feel like is, again, extremely underutilized, and it's one of the, if not the most important thing to do to help prepare yourself for your draft. And I think it's one of the most important things, and it's actually extremely fun to do. And we host mock drafts every single Monday on our channel. We live stream them, they fill up really quickly, and they're always competitive. So don't go into your drafts with zero preparation. Don't go into your drafts without doing a single mock draft. There's a lot of things you can do. If you know what pick you have going into this year, so say you're a rollover keeper league, you probably know what pick you have based on your position last season or if you made any trades. Put yourself in the mock draft at that position. And the other thing I want to say with mock drafts too is don't just go from the same position every time. I find when we host the mock drafts, there's always specific people that love to just say, okay, I'm getting number one pick. I want McDavid on my team. And then I can figure it out. It's like, don't just go from the first pick overall. Go all over the place. Make it hard on yourself. Go pick 12, go pick 8, go pick 7, and figure out where the players are that are available to you throughout your mock drafts. And that's point number 3 here is recognize players who are going well above or well below ADP. This is going to give you a huge edge. And mock drafts are the best way to identify sleepers and identify when people are going or players are going way too underdrafted. I think mock drafts are a great tool to just understand every single thing. It's a holistic view of the mock drafts. You like that word? That was a pretty good word right there. Now, recognize the positional runs and when they seem to consistently occur. And I mentioned this previously about there are going to be times in the draft where everyone just seems to draft 7 goalies in a row, 7 defensemen in a row. It's almost like a chain event. It's like when one person drafts a goalie, there's 10 more goalies that go off the board, and we see this all the time. So understand at what round this happens. This could help give you a slight edge. If you're seeing round 5, you see 10 goalies go in a row. Maybe at the end of round 4, even though I don't recommend it, you could look to draft the first goalie and start that chain event so that you're not handcuffing yourself in the end. Now, and understand your draft mistakes and how you can improve. So throughout your drafts, did 5 or 6 players get sniped from you? Why did they get sniped? And how did you pivot properly? There's a lot of opportunities for you to identify your draft weaknesses and draft strengths. I know I'm really intense about drafting and how good it could be, but you're playing this for an entire season and it's extremely fun and you're playing with your buddies and you want to get that, you want them to look and say, man, how come he's winning every single year? Because you're putting in the work to win every year. You're becoming very good at fantasy. You're going into more competitive leagues. There's a lot of little things and a little tips and tricks that you can do throughout this video to help make you better. And I think mock drafts is one of the, if not the most important thing, as I already said. So just some final concluding tips. If you're still here, thank you. You guys rock. You're all amazing people. But just make sure that you draft with a plan and you remain flexible. You're going to have to pivot no matter what throughout your draft. So do not be hard stuck on certain players throughout your draft. Just remember that things change consistently. Players get sniped consistently, and you have to be able to be flexible. Use your expert projections, use your rankings, leverage them to avoid reaching in drafts and taking players that you don't want to take. There are so many tools available, as I always emphasize, and there's so many rankings available that you could use to help base some of your picks. Identify value, have your list of sleepers. You can have it on a sticky note. You can have it on the old school piece of paper. You can have it on an Excel sheet. Understand the safe players to draft. There are a lot of players, and this goes into my next point, that are extremely durable. Moritz Seider hasn't missed a game in 4 years. Make sure you know the players that are durable, the players that are susceptible to injury, and you have to proceed with caution. Again, a lot of tools. We're going to be talking about it a lot. This happens all the time where you draft a guy that's consistently injured. He's good for 12, 15 games and then gets hurt for his 4 weeks. Dougie Hamilton, it's always him. Freddie Anderson, it's always him. So there's a lot of things that happen, and you have to make sure that you're cognizant of all the players, their injuries, their breakouts, the durability. A lot to keep in mind when looking at players. Now, adjust on demand. The draft will never, ever go as you planned. I find this all the time when I'm drafting. I play in about 8 different leagues, and each league is different. I have a league with newbies. I have leagues with very elite competitive fantasy players. So the draft strategy is going to change from league to league, and make sure you realize it'll never go as planned. Do not get upset if your players get sniped, because it happens every time, and it's more than likely, if you're watching this video, that you are also the sniper in the drafts. So keep that in mind. Now, finally, I just want to emphasize that you can see the big smile on my face. Have fun, unless you're me, who takes this way too seriously and almost treats it as a part-time job. But my leagues are for money, and if I'm playing for money, I want to make sure that I'm putting all the effort I can in to winning every single season. And also, when I'm playing with some of my buddies, they know I have the YouTube channel, so they're like, if I beat Mike, I win my fantasy league. It's always the big thing. Same with the Fantasy Puck Patreon League. If I beat Mike, which you guys didn't last year, this happens all the time. So have fun. Draft the players you want to draft in the end. If it comes to that, draft the players you want to draft. If you want to watch Nick Suzuki score the overtime winning goal on Saturday night and you took him in the 5th round when he was supposed to go in the 7th round, that is completely fine. But have fun, enjoy fantasy. For all of us, this is our dream, our hope to be the NHL GM. We're just doing it from a fantasy level, just like in Step Brothers, where where Will Ferrell says that he manages a baseball team. I may have got the wrong person in it, but Dale Dobak says that he manages a baseball team and it's a fantasy baseball team. That's just like the rest of us. So have fun. Don't take it as serious as Mike, and enjoy your fantasy leagues. That will do it for the draft strategy video. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Thank you all for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.